Vibe coding is killing your business from the inside out, even before it starts. In this video, we're going to discuss what to do about it. But first, who am I? Dr. Alan Harper. I'm the author of many best-selling cybersecurity books. I'm also a seven-figure serial entrepreneur. I've had many startups. Many of them have failed, and that's why I've learned more. And I'm here to help you. I'm passionate about cybersecurity and protecting others. So let's get into it. What is vibe coding? Vibe coding is all the rage these days, and it's really the ability to speak into an application using natural language and have that application build another application for you using AI. Okay, so you can either speak into the application or you can type what you want the application to do, and it will build an application for you. Now, there's a spectrum of AI-generated applications. First, we have the traditional way, where you have a heavy code base, a knowledge of coding, and you can use AI to augment that. Okay, then we have what we call low-code environments, where you don't really need to know how to code much, but you're going to need to know some coding. And again, you can use AI to augment that and to supplement your ability. And then there's the pure no-code environments. A lot of these are drag and drop environments where you don't need to know any coding at all. And again, AI is prevalent in these environments these days as well. But what we came to talk about is vibe coding. And that's when AI creates the code based on the natural language inputs that you give it. So you essentially say, hey, I want an application that helps me track my fitness. And I want to track calories and workouts and, exercise and different things. And the application will then go off and build that app for you, whether it be a mobile app or a web application. Okay. So this is what the AI app development journey looks like. You typically start with a problem. You want to identify a clear problem and a pain point that a large group of people have that you can solve with an application. Then you want to validate that problem. You want to confirm the market. You can actually use AI to help you validate it. My favorite tool is Perplexity. You can open up Perplexity and you can say, hey, I have an idea for this app and I want you to help me validate it by looking at Reddit posts or Quora post. And these are good sources of validation because on Reddit and Quora, you will find many people complaining about problems. And Perplexity and other AI tools can mine that data and help validate that you're onto a good problem. But at the end of the day, you're still going to need to talk to people. So I encourage you to find out where they hang out. If you don't know where they hang out, you can ask AI, hey, where does this group of people hang out? And then you frequent those places. You become a member of those groups and you actually participate in the conversation and you validate the problem. You want to sometimes agitate the problem. You want to kind of, as we say, turn the knife. You want to post a post in one of these forums and you want to ask if this is a real problem. Maybe you share the pain point with them and you describe the angst that's causing you and see if you can get other people to resonate with that. And if you find a real problem with a real large set of people that are willing to solve that problem, then you can set out to solve that problem for them. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use AI to build what I call a minimal viable demo. Now, you'll find a lot of people talking about minimum viable products. And I think this is before that. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to demo a feature or a couple of features of your major project. And you want to see if you're on the right track. Okay, you're going to put this demo in front of them. It's often not going to have any authentication. It's going to be free to use. And you're just going to go back to that place where you've been communicating with that group and you're going to drop a link in and you're going to say, hey guys, I've been working on an app and I want to know if I'm on the right track. Could you guys check this out and see if this is starting to solve the problem? Now, you don't need to solve the entire problem on day one, but you want to get some type of demo in front of them, in front of your target audience to further validate the problem. Then you're going to iterate on that demo until you develop your minimal viable product. Okay. And this is going to have a killer feature in it that solves one problem for one set of people. And that's what we call a minimum viable product. Okay. It is not the finished product, it is just your first minimum viable product that you could potentially sell, okay, to this target audience. It has enough value packed into it, but you have focused on one, perhaps subset of the major problem, okay, and you've solved it really well. And then in that case, if you're providing enough that value, then you can sell for that. And not a lot of money, but you can get started and earn your first money. And then you're going to get feedback from those users. You're going to iterate again, and you're going to keep refining that product until you get far above your minimum viable product into a real product. Okay, so this iterative approach is what is recommended today to launch a AI app generated business. So why is security critical in vibe coding? What is the issue? Well, it really only takes one hack to destroy your business. Think about it. The average hack these days cost $4.45 million. Think about that and let that set in. That's the average. Okay, now your app may be much less than that, but nonetheless, you probably can't afford to get hacked, put simply. Okay, so that's why it's important. And unfortunately, the LLMs, they are inherently vulnerable because they're trained on coding data that has vulnerabilities in it. So we have this garbage in, garbage out concept. Now that will get better over time, but not anytime soon. Okay, it's just human nature that humans make flawed code, and flawed code has vulnerabilities in it. And all of the code that is present out on the internet in places like GitHub is a very popular place to find code. Well, the LLMs, the large language models, have been trained on that corpus or that body of code. Okay, now the problem with that is, as I've already mentioned, humans made that code. Okay, so until we get to the place where we have more machine-generated code than we have human code, then you see the problem. All right, and it's going to take a while before we flush out these vulnerabilities from these LLMs. Okay, now I've thrown around this word vulnerability. Really, vulnerability is just a weakness in code. Okay, all security vulnerabilities stem from a weakness in code, either a design weakness or a weakness in how the code was implemented, or perhaps a weakness in how it was tested, how it was fielded, how it was maintained. It all comes down to code. In fact, I would dare say that all cybersecurity boils down to code. Weaknesses in code. Eventually, you're going to have to fix the code. Okay. And this is why it's such a big problem with vibe coding, is because right from the get-go, you are injecting vulnerabilities into your application without even knowing it. Now, remember, when using AI to generate code, you are responsible for its security, even if you didn't write the code yourself. Let that set in. All right, so what's the scale of the problem here? There was a recent CSA research blog, and the CSA stands for Cloud Security Alliance. They are pretty much the bedrock, one of the bedrocks in cybersecurity. They are a gold standard. They've been around for more than 20 years and have been writing and providing tools and guidance and frameworks to help people implement technology securely. All right, so they did a blog recently, and they found that 78% of AI-generated applications contain at least one critical vulnerability on the first iteration. Think about that. Now, there are common vulnerability classes, and there are a top 10 list produced by another organization called OWASP, and you can check that out. You can just Google OWASP top 10. And they have broken down all of the software vulnerabilities into a top 10 list, and we'll cover a few of them. But this blog article goes into detail not only on OWASP, but on other classes of vulnerabilities and frameworks as well. They also go into the fact that the frameworks themselves, those popular frameworks that are used out there to generate code, they often have vulnerabilities inherent in them. All right, now let's take a look at that blog just for a moment. Again, you can find this online and just look for Secure Vibe Coding Guide from CSA. All right, so we'll just give it a quick once over. You'll find at the top of the article, they talk about what is vibe coding. And again, we've talked about this. It's natural language input. So you just simply tell the AI what you're looking for, and it will generate the code for you. And then you can use this iterative refinement process that we've talked about. And ultimately, you have a minimal code understanding as a user if you're vibe coding. You may have no code understanding. Now, over time, you will pick up some things and you will learn. But initially, you have no coding experience, and it's not required as part of vibe coding. And that's the attraction of it. It's also the danger of it. Okay. Now, they talk about how vibe coding differs from other methodologies. And here's what we came to see right here. Take a look at this. Here are the common coding models as of the writing of this blog article. And you could see even the best articles or the best models are putting out insecure code. That's stunning to me. All right, then they go into the vibe coding security fundamentals. And here are just some best practices. For example, you want to avoid hard coding sensitive data in your application. You never want to embed your API keys, for example, in your code. Okay, you want to secure your API endpoints. Again, many of you are wondering, what is an API? Okay, and it's basically just an interface so that applications can talk to each other. All right, and you want to secure them. You want to validate your inputs. You want to make sure that you're not allowing a user to input data that could harm your application and harm other people. And we call that input validation. There's other things that you want to do. You want to make sure that you always use HTTPS. Okay. And that allows you to use protocols underneath the hood that will encrypt that communication when it's going across the internet. All right. You want to do regular code reviews. Okay. You want to be educated on the security basics like OWASP and other projects that are out there. And you want to seek peer review. This will be the best practices. Okay. And then they go into building a solid foundation with application security. Okay, rehashing some of the things we've already talked about. You want to have least privilege. You want to make sure that you grant the users the minimum amount of privilege that's required to execute the task. Okay, and you don't want everyone to be able to see everything. That would be a problem. Okay, you want to encrypt your data, particularly sensitive data, and you don't want to roll your own encryption. Okay, these are fundamentals of cybersecurity. You want to use tried and true encryption techniques and methodologies. You never want to reinvent that wheel. That is the number one way to get hacked, is to try to roll your own encryption. Very dangerous thing to do. Okay, then you want to have a secure integration and deployment methodology. And what that means is whenever you're pushing your code up to the internet for other people to use, you want to make sure that you're scanning that code for security vulnerabilities while you're pushing it up there. Okay, or in a lot of times you can do it before you push it up there. You can also let it run security scans while it's up in the code or up in the cloud. And again, we'll cover more of that later. You want to do regular security audits. You want to remove the console logging statements in production. Now, by default, your application will produce logs. And a lot of people don't know this, but you can get to those logs in your browser. and you want to disable that in a production environment. And there are ways that you can do that. And you want to also, along those lines, you want to hide your system errors from the user. It's never a good idea for your application to return errors, okay? Because those errors give the attacker clues as to the underlying structure of the application, and they could take advantage of those clues and they can compromise your system. Okay, we've talked about APIs. Those are those endpoints or those interfaces between two applications, or maybe between your front end application, that would be the web application, and your back end application, which contains the logic that communicates with your database. There will be an API often between them, and you want to secure that API. Why? Because you don't want just anyone to be able to reach your API and bypass your web application and directly interface with your API. You want to authenticate those users. It means you want to identify who they are and you want to grant them permission to access those APIs. It's very important that you just don't open those up to the world. Now, see, the problem is that vibe-coded applications usually have no concept of this. Okay, you told it that you wanted a fitness app. You did not tell it to do it securely. Now, you could tell it some of the things that we've been talking about here, and that goes a long ways towards securing your application, but there's many more things that you can do, and we'll cover those in a moment. Okay. Let's talk about GitHub for a second. GitHub is a code repository where you place your code, where you store your code, so that if something happens to your laptop, then you can still recover that code and you can continue developing. You're not out of business. Okay, now GitHub is one of the most popular repositories out there. It's owned by Microsoft, and it's a good place to find code that you can borrow or use depending on the license. It's also a good place that you can have a private repository where you can keep your code. You can store it and keep it safe. All right, now there are best practices for GitHub. You want to make sure that you enable two-factor authentication for your GitHub, for example. You want to make sure that other people can't get to your code and change your code on you or steal your code. Okay, you want to keep those repositories private of your production application. Okay, you want to use something called Dependabot, and Dependabot allows you to verify that the sublibraries that you're using are secure and that they don't contain vulnerabilities. Okay, you want to use secure webhooks and API tokens whenever you're communicating with GitHub and other applications. You want to do it securely, okay? And you want to protect those tokens. You want to make sure that you never include those tokens in the source code. Okay, it's very important because then the attackers may find that API code, whether out on GitHub or elsewhere. If they compromise your application, they may find those tokens that you're using on the back end, and then they can reuse those tokens without your permission, and they can run up your bill. And one day you will get like a $10,000 bill on your API, and you weren't counting on that. And again, you may be out of business. Okay, and then you want to regularly review those access permissions. And then you want to avoid pushing your environmental files, which do contain those APIs. That's a best practice. You want to avoid pushing those up to public repositories like GitHub. And then there's database security. Okay, you want to do all of these things in order to protect your database. Again, we won't cover all of these here, but it's important that you understand that there are database protections that you need to put in place as the developer of that application, or you need to have your AI do it for you. But again, if you don't ask it to do that and you're not aware of these things, then it's not going to happen. There's been many cases of applications that have been vibe coded and they've been put up on the internet only to have their database hacked. Okay, now in some of those cases, the hackers were kind enough, if you want to say that, to let the developer know that, hey, you got a problem. But there are other cases where they don't do that and they just steal the data and harm people. Okay, now we've talked about OWASP, and that's the Open Web Application Security Project. Again, you could find them online. They have a top 10 list for not only web vulnerabilities, but also cloud vulnerabilities, mobile device uh, vulnerabilities, but also LLM top 10 vulnerabilities. And yes, even whenever you're dealing with an LLM, there are underlying vulnerabilities in those LLMs. We've discussed that briefly before. But do you know that the hackers can actually hack the LLMs, perhaps even before you get to those LLMs? And they can taint those LLMs if the manufacturers or the vendors of those tools were not careful to keep the hackers out. Then they could subvert those models, and they could make sure then that those models, for example, are including vulnerabilities in your application. And that would be a very bad thing. So you just need to be aware of these things, particularly if you're using open source models, or dare I say, if you're rolling your own LLM. And there are ways that you can do that out there, but you want to probably steer away from that and let these big companies that have the billions of dollars handle the security of those models. Okay. Cloud deployment. Where are you going to run this application? I recommend Vercel. It is my favorite place to host my applications, and they have a very generous free plan, and that's why I recommend them. But you're going to want to consider your cloud environment, no matter where you store it, whether it be AWS or Azure or Vercel, which is what I recommend. Even those platforms have security provisions that you can enable, but you have to be aware of those and you have to enable them. All right, and here's just a list of some of the things that you can do. Again, you can find these in this blog article. Okay, and then in this article, they go into many different vibe coding prompts that you can use. All right, so we've talked about, vibe coding, and we've talked about telling the AI to build an app for you. Well, here are some ways that you can tell it to be more secure. You could tell it, for example, to generate code to connect to a database using environmental variables for the database URL, username, and password. Okay, so that way it knows not to put those sensitive credentials inside of the code. It's going to use environmental variables to do that. Okay, and that's just one example. And again, we won't go into this or belabor that point. Okay, now here's some other things that you can do. You could tell it to generate code that implements role-based access control in a web application, ensuring users only have access to the features that they need. Okay, so again, that's that least privilege concept that we talked about. Okay, you could tell it on its data for data encryption. You could tell it to generate code that encrypts sensitive data in transit using HTTPS and at rest using AES 256 encryption. That's the best encryption that we have today. All right. And you can give it all of these other statements whenever you're telling, in addition to telling it to create a fitness app for you, you can also add these sentences in. And that will go a long ways in the AI helping you to secure the application. Okay, but there's more that you can do. Again, we'll cover that in a moment. All right, and they go through different things that you can do for your database, different LLM prompts that you can do. Okay, and then again, here's best practices like whenever you're using Vercel. So again, love this blog article. Really good stuff for you. Don't sleep on this article. I encourage you to get out there and to read this blog article. All right. So now we've talked about the scale of the problem. Let's talk just about three major security vulnerabilities that are found in vibe coding. The first one has to do with authentication issues. Okay, again, authentication is whenever you identify a user, it means that the user presents some identifying credentials, maybe their username or their email address and a password, for example. That would be one form of authentication. All right. You want to make sure that you have strong authentication for your application. All right. At the very least, you're going to need a username and a password, but that's at the very least. There are multi-factors of authentication. That would be one factor, and that would be something that they know. Okay. We call that something that they know, a username and a password. They would remember that. Okay. A second factor of authentication would be something that they have. Okay, something like a mobile phone that you could text a code to them, or perhaps an application on that mobile phone that would allow them to generate a one-time code that could be used in your application. Okay, so that would be a second factor of authentication, because in addition to something that they know, they would need something that they have. Okay, like that mobile phone. Okay, and then the third form of authentication that you can add or factor would be something that you are. So that would take advantage of like biometrics, for example. Like sometimes on a phone, the phone will use your facial recognition to unlock. That's a form of biometrics. Another form would be like a thumbprint. A lot of the old iPhones, you would put your thumbprint on the button, and it would unlock the phone. Okay, so that would use your thumbprint as the third form of authentication. So we want multiple factors of authentication. We call that MFA, multiple factor authentication. Okay, and you're going to want to be aware of those different levels of authentication. And depending on what you're protecting in your app, if you're protecting financial data or medical data or sensitive personal information, then you're going to want to use multiple factors of authentication. Okay, so that's one major class of vulnerability would be weak authentication. Okay, inadequate MFA, for example, and also vulnerabilities as it relates to password reset. Okay, you want to make sure that only your users can reset their passwords, for example. Okay, and the best way to do that is to send that reset link to their email address that they registered with the app. Okay, you just don't want to let them do it right online, because somebody may guess or reset that password for your user, and then you're going to have a bad day as well as them. All right. The next thing is authorization flaws. So once we've got the user logged in, where are we going to let that user go in the application? We're not going to let them go everywhere. Okay. We're not going to let them, at the very least, they're not going to be able to see other users' data, right? So we're going to restrict them to their data. That's the very least that we can do. But beyond that, we want to make sure that if there are sensitive portions of your application, perhaps admin pages that only you as the administrator or the owner of the application can see, you want to make sure that you restrict your users and that they are not authorized to access those pages. We've also touched on this before. We want to make sure that the APIs that we use in our application, underneath the hood, there will be these APIs, that these vibe-coded applications created for you. We're going to make sure that we only allow our authorized users to use those APIs through the web application itself. Okay. And then we have input validation failures. We want to make sure that that LLM generated code protects you from input validation issues. Okay. So what that means is whenever a user is interacting with your application, whether it be just even putting their username and password into the first form that you provide them, you want to make sure that you validate that input and that it actually is a username that has, for example, an @ sign in it because you use email addresses for all of your usernames. And it does not allow them to put things like JavaScript, or like tags like brackets, open brackets and close brackets, and these different types of code. They can't enter code into a text field. This is called input validation, and you can use tools like Zod, which is ZOD, is a popular input validation tool these days. But again, if you didn't tell your LLM or your vibe coding engine to do that, it's not going to do it. Okay, so you would tell it, use Zod for input validation on all sensitive input points, including APIs. And then your LLM has a fighting chance and knows that you even want to do that, because out of the box, it will not know that. Okay, there are other classes of vulnerabilities out there that deal with your database, and some of the more fatal ones are called SQL injection. Okay, so an SQL injection is when the user will take that input field, like let's say the username, and they will put an SQL statement in there, which is a software language that is used by the database. And if you're not careful as the developer, and yes, I said as the developer, even though you're a vibe coder, you're still a developer. Okay. If you're not careful as a vibe coder and you haven't told the LLM to validate those inputs, then you may be opening yourself up to one of the most dangerous types of vulnerabilities. It's called a SQL injection. And that allows an attacker to manipulate your database through your front end web application. And that's going to be a bad day if that happens. Okay, because they may pull all the data out of that database through that username field that you ask them for. Okay, and that's how dangerous it can be. And under certain circumstances, they may be able to compromise the system and actually take it over. And again, that would be a bad day. All right, there are other forms of input validations that you want to prevent. The next one is called XSS, or cross-site scripting. Okay, and cross-site scripting is whenever an attacker can inject JavaScript, okay, into your input, and you reflect that back either to the user or to another user that comes by later. This is common on things like, for example, a feedback page where you can put comments or you solicit comments from your users. Well, what if an attacker puts a comment up there that has some malicious JavaScript in it? And unbeknownst to you, they injected that in as a comment, and then another user comes along and they view that comment with their browser, and their browser runs that JavaScript, and it could steal their cookies. Under certain circumstances, it may be able to steal their passwords that they're using for their bank applications and other things. And again, that user, which is your user, is going to have a bad day, and therefore you're going to have a bad day. Okay, and also, like, if you're allowing file uploads, you're going to want to make sure that you're careful what you're doing with those files. You're going to make sure that you're not evaluating or running or executing those files in any manner, because the attacker may put a malicious file and inject that into your application. And again, then you're going to have a bad day. Okay, so now that we've talked about the common vulnerabilities and the major classes of vulnerabilities that you need to be aware of, let's talk about securing your vibe coding pipeline. Okay, so there are a number of things that you can do, and I've alluded to a couple of these, but let's go a little bit deeper. The first thing you can do is you can use secure starters. On GitHub and in other locations, you can find secure starters, and these would be template applications that you start with that have some security built in them. So instead of telling your LLM to start from scratch and build this fitness app, you may start with a secure starter application that already has authentication built into it. It maybe already has input validation. It already has secure API interfaces. And then you just take that template and you tell the LLM to turn that into your fitness application for you, and to not change the underlying security elements that are already present in that starter. Okay, and you'd have to tell it to do that, or else don't be surprised if your LLM just gets creative on you. Okay, the next thing that you can do is you can use LLM security rules. So did you know that a lot of these LLMs, what they'll do is you can provide input, and they will add that context as part of the input or the system prompt that gets injected into the LLM. So you can make a security rules file, for example, and you could tell it all of those tips that maybe you got from the CSA blog article or other ones that we're going to give you later that will allow you to instruct the LLM how to do application development more securely. Okay, and I want to be careful here, and I want to foot stomp on an issue. There is no such thing as a secure app, and you should run from anyone who claims that there is. Okay, I can just tell you with 36 years of experience in the field, there is no such thing as a secure app, but there are hardened apps, and you can harden an app with security, and you can make it more secure than other apps. And that's often what we do in the field of cybersecurity. Okay, it's the dirty little secret of our field is that we don't really, there's no such thing as 100% security. Again, you should run from anyone who claims that there is. But what we can do is we can harden the environment, we can harden the application, we can harden the database, and we can make the cost of the attacker increase significantly so that they go elsewhere and hit your competitor. And that's often what we do. That's the game we play in cybersecurity. So as a developer, you don't want to, the goal is not to, have 100% security, but you want to have enough security. You want to harden that application so that it makes it significantly more expensive for the attacker to try to hack your system. And therefore, they'll just go somewhere else because they're lazy often themselves. All right. So that's the LLM security rules. And again, you could find some repos on those. I'm going to share more of those in another video that I've already found, and I'm going to develop my own to help as well. All right. And then there are multi-layer scanning that you can perform. First of all, did you know you could just ask the LLM after it's created the app? You could tell the LLM to conduct a cybersecurity scan on the code, and you will be surprised at what that LLM will find. It's amazing to me what the LLM will find. It's the same code, the same engine that you generated the application with. It will find vulnerabilities for you. And I just want to think, well, why didn't you just prevent that to start with? Right? It's a good question. All right. The next thing is you can do what's called static application security testing. And that's when you use a code scanner to evaluate the code, the static source code. Okay. And it will then run through that static source code, and you don't need to know anything about the code, but you can run a scanner on it. You can even tell your LLM to run the scanner, and it will generate then a report on that. The next thing that you can do is use what's called DAST, or dynamic application security scanning, or tools. And these are, instead of just looking at the source code, which would be static, in this case, the scanner will actually run against your running application. Okay, it'll do it dynamically in a running environment. And so there are a number of tools out there that you can do to penetration test or to evaluate your application while it's running. And you can try to ferret out the security vulnerabilities that way. Okay. And so that's the multiple layers of security scanning that you should be doing and should be engaging in as a vibe coder. Okay. And again, you can use your LLM to do much of this. You could tell it that you want to run it, this static application security testing tool, and or define one to run for you. Okay. So you don't need to know all of these things, but you need to know that they exist, and you need to know how to ask for them. All right, and the last thing I would offer to you is that you can use something called a Model Context Protocol, or an MCP. And that's just a fancy way of saying a connector between AI applications, or between AI and normal applications. Okay, so there are a number of people out there building these MCPs, which again are just, it's a fancy way of saying a connector between your AI and another application. So there are MCPs for all kinds of applications, like Microsoft products like Word and PowerPoint, and all the way down to desktop applications, all the way down to security testing tools. And you can find MCPs out there, and you can even use your LLM to help you find MCPs. And a good MCP to find would be one that is, for example, a scanner, for example, like Trivy, TRIVY, would be a security scanner, and they have an MCP for that. And you could tell your LLM to, help you connect to the Trivy MCP and to conduct a scan on your application, for example. Okay. Now, wrapping up this video, I just want to share with you that we're building in public. I have started a new site called securevibe.ai. And on this site, I'm going to provide training and mentoring. I do that in my Skool community, which you can also find me on the Skool platform. I have several school rooms. One of them is a free group, and it's geared toward people trying to get into cybersecurity. It happens to be the number one cybersecurity group on Skool out of probably hundreds of cybersecurity groups there. We happen to be the number one. If you go in the tech category and start scrolling down, you will find my group. Okay, it's called AI Cyber Value Creators, and that's my group. And that's for people that are looking to get into cybersecurity. And if that's you, then I encourage you to go find me on Skool. And you can also find me at alanharper.com. And on my website, you can sign up for that free mentoring if that's what you want. But this group here is going to be a separate group that I have on Skool. Okay. And this is where I support founders and entrepreneurs like yourself that are looking to build AI applications and sell them, but do it securely. Okay. And in this group, we're going to provide training and mentoring for you to help you with that. I'm also going to develop my own set of security tools, okay, to help you do all of the things that we've talked about here. I'm going to build my own set of LLM rules and my own scanners, okay, that will help you scan these vibe-coded applications. They'll be tuned for the particular issues that are generated out of vibe-coded applications, and I'm looking forward to doing that in public. So what that means is on this channel, you're gonna see me build those apps, okay? And I'm gonna have long coding sessions where I'll be building those apps. So make sure that you subscribe and you hit that alert button so that you're made aware of any time that I go live. I might do some of these on live sessions, but regardless, you'll be able to follow along with this journey as we help secure the vibe coding community. All right, and then also I'm going to start an incubator, and I'm going to help founders launch their businesses. Okay, and in there you will find not only the mentorship and the resource that we've talked about, but also partnership opportunities where I'll be able to help you launch securely. All right, so you can visit securevibe.ai, and that is the website where you can get started. All right, well, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to future sessions. And again, be sure that you subscribe and hit that alert button so that you're made aware. And you have a blessed day.